Story 1. The listing had been too good to be true. A charming, secluded cottage nestled deep in the woods, advertised with a cascade of sun-drenched photos and glowing reviews. Tranquil escape, one read. Pure bliss, another raved. I'd booked it spontaneously, desperate for a break from the city's relentless hum. The price was suspiciously low, but I'd chalked it up to an off-season deal. The drive there was long, the paved road eventually giving way to a rutted dirt track that snaked through an increasingly dense forest. By the time I arrived, dusk was bleeding into night. The cottage, when I finally spotted it through the towering pines, looked less charming and more tired. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged, and the windows seemed to stare out like vacant eyes. A woman, whom I assumed was the host, stepped onto the porch, silhouetted against the dim interior light. She was tall, unnaturally so, with sharp angles to her face and eyes that glittered with an unsettling intensity. Her husband stood behind her, a hulking shadow with a perpetually fixed smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. They introduced themselves as Agnes and Silas. Their voices were soft, almost whispered, as they guided me through the cottage. The interior wasn't quite as advertised. The furniture was dated, the air heavy with a musty odor, and despite the summer evening, the place felt strangely cold. The promised amenities seemed to be missing or broken. The Wi-Fi was non-existent, the television a relic, and the charming fireplace, Agnes explained with that unnerving smile, was for decorative purposes only. We like to keep things simple here, Silas murmured, his gaze lingering on me a moment too long. I tried to shake off the unease. It was just an old house, I told myself. Hosts can be a bit eccentric. I was being dramatic. The first night was punctuated by a series of unsettling sounds. A rhythmic thumping from upstairs, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. A soft, almost mournful scratching at the back door. I told myself it was branches scraping against the wood, the wind playing tricks. But the thumping was too deliberate, too regular. I found myself lying awake for hours, straining my ears, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Sleep finally claimed me, a fitful, shallow thing, only to be shattered by a blood-curdling scream. It was distant, muffled, but unmistakably human. My eyes flew open, my breath catching in my throat. I lay there, rigid, listening. Silence. Had I dreamt it? The silence that followed was more terrifying than any noise. The next morning, the unnerving politeness of Agnes and Silas felt more sinister. Their eyes seemed to track my every movement. When I casually asked about the noises, Agnes waved a dismissive hand. Just the house settling, dear. It's an old place, you know. Full of character. Silas merely chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. I decided to explore the cottage during the day. Wandering into the dusty spare bedroom upstairs, I noticed something odd. A section of the wallpaper seemed to be misaligned, a faint darker rectangle visible beneath it. Curiosity overriding my growing fear, I pressed my fingers against it. The wall felt hollow. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed harder. The section of wallpaper, and the plaster behind it, gave way with a sickening crunch, revealing a dark, narrow opening. It was a hidden room. My stomach churned. Peering inside, I saw only darkness, but the air that seeped out was fetid, thick with an odor I couldn't quite place. A sense of overwhelming dread washed over me. I quickly plastered the hole back, my hands trembling. That night, the noises were worse. The thumping upstairs was louder, closer. The scratching at the door was a frantic, desperate sound. I huddled in bed, clutching a heavy lamp, the silence now a suffocating blanket that pressed down on me. Then, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, creaking across the floorboards of the room directly above mine. They were Silas's heavy steps, but he and Agnes had told me they were staying in the small cabin they owned on the far side of their property. My breath hitched. I didn't dare move. The footsteps moved to the edge of the room, directly above my head. Then, a soft, rhythmic tapping began on the ceiling. It wasn't random. It was a code. A series of deliberate taps. My mind reeled, desperately trying to decipher it, but it was useless. Suddenly, the thumping upstairs stopped. A profound silence descended, broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart. I stayed frozen, listening, waiting. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable. Then, from the hallway outside my bedroom, I heard a soft, familiar click. The doorknob to my room began to turn. Story 2. The Airbnb listing for the Gables was a masterclass in deception. The photos showcased a beautifully restored farmhouse, all reclaimed wood, minimalist furniture, and sprawling windows that drank in the golden light of the countryside. The hosts, Martha and Elias, had over 100 five-star reviews. "A perfect writer's retreat," one gushed. "The silence is heavenly," another wrote. They weren't wrong about the silence. It was the first thing I noticed when I killed the engine of my car. It was a thick, heavy silence that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Martha met me on the porch, a woman with a smile so wide and white it looked like a crack in a porcelain mask. "Welcome, Daniel. We're so glad you made it." Elias stood a step behind her, a tall, gaunt man who simply nodded, his eyes lingering on me a moment too long. The tour was brief. The house was as immaculate as the photos, but sterile, like a museum exhibit. Every cushion was plumped, every surface gleaming. My room was upstairs, at the end of a long hallway. "You'll have this whole wing to yourself," Martha said, her voice a cheerful, brittle thing. "Our quarters are downstairs on the other side. Just one house rule. This door," she gestured to a plain, unmarked door next to mine, "is for storage. It's a bit of a mess, so we keep it locked. Best to just forget it's there." I nodded, not thinking anything of it. The first night the silence was broken. It was a faint, rhythmic thump. 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 The sound was muffled, difficult to place. I told myself it was the house settling, the old wood groaning under the phantom weight of its own history. I put in my earbuds and drifted off. The second night, it was louder. Thump. 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 It was accompanied by a new sound. A dry, whispery scratching, like a dog at a door. But it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the wall. The wall I shared with the locked storage room. I got out of bed, pressing my ear against the cool plaster. The scratching stopped. The thumping stopped. The silence rushed back in, now feeling accusatory. I felt foolish. It was an old house. Old houses make noises. The next morning, Martha was almost unnervingly bright at breakfast. "Sleep well?" she asked, that porcelain smile fixed in place. "Fine, thanks," I lied. "It's an old house." "Takes some getting used to the sounds." Elias, who was polishing a silver spoon with obsessive focus, looked up. His gaze was flat, empty. "It has its own voice," he said, his tone monotone. Martha's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. That night, the noises started earlier. The thumping was more frantic, the scratching more desperate. And then, a new sound threaded through the others, a sound that made the blood in my veins turn to ice water. A whimper. It was low and weak, almost lost beneath the other sounds, but it was undeniably human. It sounded like a child, or a woman trying to stifle a sob. My writer's imagination, which I had come here to ignite, was now my enemy, painting horrifying scenarios in the dark. I crept to the locked door and tried the handle. It was solid, unmoving. There was no keyhole, only a modern, keyless deadbolt. I knelt, trying to peer under the door, but the gap was too small. The scratching from the other side stopped abruptly, as if it sensed my presence. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, I knew I had to leave. I packed my bag, my hands trembling. I would make an excuse, a family emergency. When I went downstairs, Martha and Elias were sitting in the living room, not speaking, just staring into the cold fireplace. "I'm so sorry," I began, my voice unsteady. "I have to cut my trip short. A family matter." Martha's smile didn't falter. "Oh, what a shame. We were so enjoying having you. Is there anything we can do? Elias asked, his voice still devoid of any emotion. It was the most he'd said to me all weekend. No, I just need to get on the road. As I walked toward the front door, my shoe scuffed against a loose floorboard in the hallway. I glanced down. It was a small detail in an otherwise perfect house. And beneath the edge of the board was a glint of metal. A key. An old iron skeleton key. It was clearly not for any of the modern locks in the main house. My heart hammered against my ribs. Without thinking, I bent down as if to tie my shoe, my fingers closing around the cold metal. I palmed it, straightened up, and gave them a final, forced smile. I was halfway to my car when I stopped. The whimpering. I couldn't just leave. What if I was wrong? What if it was just faulty plumbing, and I was abandoning a perfectly nice, if eccentric couple? But what if I was right? I was. Driven by a terrible, sickening compulsion, I turned back. I didn't go to the front door. I crept around the side of the house, to the windows of the locked room. They were boarded up from the inside. All but one, a small transom window high up near the roofline, covered in a century of grime. I found an old rain barrel, dragged it beneath the window, and climbed on top. Wobbling, I wiped a patch of dirt from the glass with my sleeve and peered into the darkness within. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. The room wasn't for storage. It was empty, save for a thin mattress in the corner. And on the far wall, I could see them. Scratches. Hundreds of them, gouged deep into the plaster. They formed words, written over and over. Not guests. Harvest. Then, a flicker of movement from the mattress drew my eye. A figure sat up. It was a young woman, terribly thin, with matted hair and wide, terrified eyes that seemed to glow in the gloom. Our eyes met through the grimy glass. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She just looked at me, a silent, desperate plea. I scrambled down from the barrel, my breath catching in my throat. I fumbled for my car keys, my mind screaming. The porch light flicked on. Martha and Elias were standing in the doorway, their perfect smiles gone. In their place were looks of cold, placid disappointment. "It seems our guest is a little too curious," Martha said, her voice losing all its false warmth. Elias took a step forward. The last one was planning on staying so much longer.